Yes, there is some energy left in everyone. We are 69 minutes and 50 seconds away from you guys having a beer or a wine. But we've saved the best till last. Okay? So, Ramon Cliquet.
There you go.
I knew I was going to mess it up. It's French, right?
I do that sometimes.
We first met like about 18 months, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And this guy's worked in everything from print to web, now UX lead, creative guy at BHP, would you believe? And the projects that Ramon and his team work on are fascinating. These guys are working on interface design for incredible things to do with the mining industry and ports and things like that. They've got quite a big team. This guy is so passionate about creativity, about design, and about design systems. We just couldn't help but invite him to come and close out the whole conference for us. So no pressure, man, but, my expectations are super high.
Wow.
Thank you very much. Welcome.
That's fine.
And welcome, everyone.
I appreciate it.
We're almost home, but This is awesome. Thank you.
Yo, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I feel it's a pleasure that Adobe invited me to present this evening. Last year, I was the one sitting where you guys are, attended Make It, and I had so much fun. And I know how tired you guys might be, so if you're walking like a zombie, I don't blame you after a shot of creative juice. So, let's get going. My name is Ramon Cliquet, and in this session, we'll be covering design systems. So just a summary a little bit. Over the past few years, design have grown, and with that, teams have grown as well. One of the issues that larger corporations face, at least, is to keep all the teams in sync, especially product teams and internal teams, external teams. So what a design system does, it's allow those teams to speak the same language, but most importantly, provide a consistent customer experience across products. Let's get started. First things first, we will be covering 5 topics, and then we'll open for QA. You will be sitting down, and I'll be talking for an hour, so maybe that's not a bad thing, because you might leave this room mastering Brazilian accent. But let's see how it goes. We will start with some industry facts and challenges. We will dive into some of the issues you might face once you start working on larger corporations or try to reach many customers. Then we try to understand how our design systems can help, how can it assist us to solve those issues, and then we look what the design system really is, what it's made of, what can you expect to see, and then we look at how to create a design systems, which we will make sure that we need to assure a few things, that we display, that we provide certain content, certain type of contents. So, and then we look at the adoption of the design systems, which to me it's really hard beat. And then we open the floor for some questions. All good? Awesome. Cool. So just to introduce me a little bit better, like I mentioned, I'm from Brazil. My name is Ramon Cliquet. I came to Australia in 2008, landed in Perth, the beautiful WA, and have been there ever since. I love Sydney. We come to Sydney every 2 years or so. It's awesome that I'm here. I always have a lot of fun. My wife and I, we brought the baby this year, so a whole new experience now. I got 15 years of experience cross-discipline. I started doing design not knowing that I was actually doing design. Back in the day, doing material for my band, awful logos and cover albums, but I enjoyed the activity. And then I studied some short courses on for Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, and then as well as I studied advertising and mass communications. I've worked on agency sides, advertising agencies, digital agencies, and doing designer roles, art director, and creative director roles. I always like to jump between agent side and client side. On the client side, I try to focus mainly on the customer experience and user experience side of things, which allows me to see the bigger picture and work very closely with marketing teams and product teams in there. So after 7 years in Australia working for a digital agency, I moved to IINet and work on the customer experience team over there. And then for the past 2 years, almost 2 years, I've been working at BHP. You might be asking yourself, what does a designer do at BHP? I don't dig holes, but I try to dig some crazy solutions. We try to solve some very complex problems across, especially on my function, especially around the production side of things, and work a lot with automation and newer technologies. I have been lucky enough to have co-created applications, websites, and services that multiple users and multiple customers have interacted with. And so far, involved on the creation and governance of 3 different design systems for different corporations. Cool. So that's me. Let's get started. And as I mentioned, first things first. Let's dive into some of the problems, some of the challenges you can expect to come across once you start working on a larger corporation. So the first one I want to cover is, yes, brands are investing in design. They saw the value that designers can bring to the table in order to provide a great customer experience, which provides and allow them to have a more competitive market advantage against their competitors. But with that growth, some issues you can expect to get some issues. And one of the issues is that if you're investing to convert your product or service or deliver digital content, it means that you're trying to provide experience on very different devices, on very different interface, on very different browsers for the very different operational systems, for example. And in digital as well, you can solve the same problem in many different ways. So it means you almost like if you have multiple teams working on their own projects, living in a bubble, let's say, they might be delivering very disjointed user experiences and customer experience. The second issue is that we live on the digital age where customers, they demand for disruption and innovation to the speed of culture, let's say. They want to get all the latest gadgets and all the latest high tech applications now. They want to be empowered by us. So they demand a lot of products and a lot of design work for. But the problem is that on a recent research, almost 80% of products miss their launch date, and that's a big number. And what does that tell us? That tells us that we're struggling to keep the pace that technology requires from us. So we've got to find a way of do more in less time. We've got to find a way of accelerating and speeding things up. And perhaps, if you find a way of accelerating the ideation phase as well as the production phase, then it means we will be able to deliver more in less time. The second point that I want to cover is that design is still sort of it's still more like a service. We still have that mindset of that artistic nature that we have. We start from a blank canvas most of the time, and then we work from there. We try to solve problems with tailor-made approach, with a unique approach. So we need to find a way of perhaps changing that, and perhaps making design more like a product for larger corporations and product teams. Yeah, and when I say that, it means we need to find a way of design to not just accelerate those teams, but empower those teams as well as empower those customers. So yeah, perhaps it's a little bit of a mindset change in there. And there you go. That's the digital design drama that we face nowadays. Rapidly growth, too much demand. Which we saw teams growing, and it's really hard to keep in sync. Second one, tailor-made for individual problems. So we're still trying to solve problems in a very unique problems in a very unique way, instead of trying to perhaps reuse or approach methodologies that have been successful in the past. It's difficult to scale and maintain consistency, especially when teams grow and you have internal teams, external teams. It's hard to keep in sync. It's hard to, not just on the visual side of things, but on the process, on the methodologies that you use, and all of that. And lastly, design still has a very slow response to metrics and feedback. When I say that, we still try to validate all the designs. We still need to validate all the designs and products that we deliver to end customers. But once you get that, then it's still a lot of rework and internal rework in order to retest everything and then deliver again for the end customers. Perhaps if you find a way, and I believe you guys have heard that over and over again over the past few days on this conference, we need to adapt more rapidly to data. We need to find a way of empowering our designs to adapt more rapidly to data and response from end customers. Cool. So now we know some of the issues you might face. What does that has to do with a design system? How does a design system can help us and assist us to with some of those challenges? So basically, a design system will allow your teams to collaborate and iterate much more quickly. And most importantly, deliver customer experiences that are consistent and the right customer experience, the customer experience that your end users want and your brand needs. So to me, that's the core of a design system. It aims to enable, empower, and enforce great experiences. And it does that mostly on those three pillars, let's say. It allows internal teams and external teams to speak the same language, so everyone will have visibility of what's available in terms of design assets and components and elements that should be used to design things, as well as all the code base and other approaches. It will accelerate product development and design handover, and that's because with a design systems, you not just have your visual elements static, but you have that in an interactive form. So devs can just grab that code for that particular component and build greater, larger things, greater things with that. They don't need to start from scratch. We are not reinventing the wheel all the time. It will provide a consistent and unique experience to your customer, and that's the goal. That's the goal. It's to allow internal teams to build robust applications that your customers want. So this is why really, all the larger corporations that are out there, they not just have created their own design system, but some of those companies, they have shared the design systems. Let's just bring some examples here, which will allow you to have a better understanding. Cool. So if you go to styleguide.io, for example, and I highly recommend you guys making a note on that and perhaps going to that site. It's a library, it's a website that condenses a lot of content around design systems, and they provide a lot of not just open source, but design systems that are open to the public. Some corporations make their own design system and keep private. Some corporations open to the public, and some actually share the code base and the material to product teams. So if I just have a look at some of the examples here, you will see corporations such as IBM here, Salesforce, as well as the US government. So they all try to compile somehow all the assets that they have for designers and developers and product teams in one single source of truth. On their website, you also can find a lot of books and podcasts and talks and other things around design systems. So I highly recommend. If I open some of those ones, and I can open perhaps the material design, which it's Google design system, and they open that to the public, and you'll see a little bit what that is, and just to get a more tangible view of what design system is. They provide, for example, things especially for designers, some content specifically for developers, and some other tools as well. So if you look at the design, it's quite comprehensive because it provides documentation on how to use, where to use things. So if I go for just in terms of going through here, so I can go to layout, understanding layout, and it will provide documentation on how to, what you should expect, and specs, and so on and so forth. What else can I show here? So if I go to development, for example, you'll see many things for developers. And if I go to components, for example, we will list all the components that are available. For example, here, all the buttons and the code snippets that developers can use. And it should be very interactive. You should be able to interact and see the things in real life. So here, for example, this is the IBM one. As well as it provides a lot of content. We'll go through all of this, but that's what a design system aims to do. It's to provide, the interactive version of the component and the code base required to implement that. Other components such as Atlassian, they provide many things. And probably the first design system that happened, it was Google, Apple's one. It was actually a book back in the day, and now they have an interactive form, and you can go there and jump to the specific contents for Mac, iOS, watches, and TVs, and so on and so forth. What those companies saw and understood is that it's not just about making great designs. We got to make designs great, and we need to make designs that empower people, empower product teams and users, perhaps empower everyone. And to do so, we need to follow a few concepts. And we'll go through 5 of those concepts that I take into consideration, and I'm going to share with you guys. So the first one is, let's make design reusable. In order to make design great, let's make design reusable. We need to unify all our design assets into one place so that we don't need to build things from scratch all the time. We need to find a way of creating visibility on those components so others can reuse. The word reusable really is on the heart of a design systems. That's what the design system really is all about. And not just reuse components, but reuse approach, best practices, methodologies, and etc. So in that case, really think about your co-worker designer. If a newbie lands on your team, most times we have a handover, from a colleague, and that's all good. But if this person can go to this content and really understand everything design, the whole holistic view about your design assets and approach, then it means he will be able to reuse most of that and go from there. We also got to make design consistent. And that's really repetition and recall. That's UX 101. Because consistency, it creates a more easy-to-use interface for our end customers because it will be more predictable and easy to understand UI. It will allow us to spend less time as well with minor fixes for styling and whatnot, and more time, think about the greater things such as the experience, the prototyping, and interactions. And really think about your end customer here. You want to provide consistent designs to your end customers. So if they receive a newsletter, for example, and then they land on our website, and then from that they move to our e-commerce space where they purchase your product, and then they open your product, you want to provide consistent assets in there and consistent components and elements. So they don't need to learn new things on how to interact with our brands every time he needs to go through that journey. We also got to make design more efficient. And when I say efficiently, I mean it needs to respond more quickly to technology. It needs to be more connected to the code base, so we can spend more time with interactions and experimentations. Really, we think about your developer in that case. If you're on a product team, you have your designers, developers, BAs, product owners, and others. And really, we want to provide designs that allow them to be more efficient and productive. Think about your PM, for example, or even your employee or your whole brand. They want to have product teams that are productive, that are efficient, and we got to think about how can our designs empower that. And let's make design robust. When I say that, it needs to evolve in parallel with technology. We need to have a product mindset when we design. And when I say product mindset, perhaps it needs to always evolve and be adaptable on very different devices that might come up in the future. So we need to start with cross-product or cross-platform mindset, mobile-first mindset, and really design for many devices and not for one specific thing. We need to design in a way that will perform with grace and very minimal bugs. That's the goal to our end customers. And you really think about your developer and your end customer in that. They want to get designs that they can just use and go with the flow and not really worry about learning new things all the time. And lastly, let's make design reliable. And that's because most of the time we think about accessibility as the entire page. We got to think about the accessibility in the beginning. While we design smaller components, smaller things, the accessibility needs to be created from the component level. Most times we rush around the accessibility. Maybe we take for granted because we need to deliver something very fast and we leave that for last. So we need to start accessibility on the early days, on the early stage of a project, of a UI. And really think about your end users. How can you make your design reliable and optimize your design for perhaps users with disabilities, slow connection, old computers, and etc. All good so far? Awesome. So those are some of the core benefits of design systems. You will avoid application rework. You will create unification, alignment, and consistency. It will provide the right to use material, and that's because those materials have been tested and are bulletproof. And you will save time, money, and hustle because it is a start kit for product teams to be empowered by. Cool. Now we know how a design system can help us to solve some of those issues. But what the heck a design system really is? I guess in the summary, it is a collection of standalone components you can reuse to build greater things, or perhaps a number of different applications. A design system is your product interface and experience living and breathing one single source of truth. I will explain that a little bit more. If you think about a design system, it's not a new concept. For those that have been involved on branding, for example, when you design a new logo for your client or a brand identity, you provide that client with a very comprehensive document that states the do's and don'ts on where to apply, how to apply that logo on different mediums and materials. And that's what design system is. But the problem is that on the branding space, brands, they don't change very often. They stay unchanged most of the time, at least for a few, 5 years or so. And that document remains unchanged as well. On the digital space, it changes all the time. We have to upgrade applications. We have to upgrade our operational systems, and we also want to upgrade our device with the latest stuff. So on the digital space, whatever we have in terms of elements and visual assets and design components, it needs to always evolve. So it needs to evolve with technology. It needs to be provided as a living, breathing material. And that's a single source of truth because that's where anyone that wants to understand what's available for designers or for product teams to develop things, they go to that space and they can go from there. So some of the things that you should expect to see on a design systems, you should expect to see perhaps all your graphical user interface elements as design, as visual, as code. So you need to see the code snippet for that material as well. And you want to see the documentation. When you say documentation, the do's and don'ts, and when to apply and where to apply. So that's more, let's cover some of the fundamentals. We all love colors. We need colors to do our job. So colors really is a must. So the hierarchy, how to use colors, the combinations, how can you match colors? Is there reserved colors for certain things? Typography, the sizing, the line heights. If you have multiple typefaces, how can you combine those? What's the primary? What's the secondary? And then you look more at the visual layout. So the grids, the spacing, positioning, structuring, and etc. And then you can go to more the visual assets, which will provide the logos, the icons, and images and illustration, anything that's for your brand in terms of showing the brand itself. And then you need to always provide the same stuff, but more earlier we mentioned mainly the fundamentals, which it's yes your customer will see, but not really very interactive. Now we can look more in the interactive bits. Common components, the buttons, the forms, the tables, cards, tooltips, popovers. Those are more generic. You might have, for your own brands or corporations, you might have custom components you created for certain requirements. You would showcase that in there as well. And then you can look at the common patterns. Once you interact with those components, what happens if you have validation. So provide some guidance on how that response happens. And then the content, tone, and voice as well. If you want to talk to a certain audience, what's the type of sentences you want to use in order to reach that audience? Especially nowadays with all the voice boxes and etc. So it's less design, more voice. So we gotta provide some guidance on that sense as well. And motion and sound and gestures. That's a lot of these specifications for interaction and touch devices, etc. Cool, but we make sure everything that the end customer would see and interact with, and that's what's important for them, but we should extend, we should go deeper, and like I mentioned multiple times, we need to empower product teams as well, so we want to explain how to tackle design as well. So anyone landing on your design systems, they would understand not just the visual assets, but as well as the principles and criteria they should follow, the best practices, what's the usability checks they should perform, as well as provide process and activities. So what's the methodologies your design team use? What are the ways of working? How they can engage with a design team, as well as provide the design team and structure and roles. So what's expected from certain job title? What are the contact details, and etc. Cool. It all sounds really complex. There are lots to be covered. But in the end of the day, you don't need to start from scratch. There are design systems out there that are open source. Probably you guys are familiar with Bootstrap, the most used UI framework, HTML, CSS related framework out there. Foundation similar to Bootstrap, but different code base. And then you look at Material UI, which again, similar, but it provides more complexity, more logic. So devs would prefer that. And then you have to consider, of course, the logic side of things. Angular, React, that's more advanced codes that you would need to integrate your designs with. Now that you understand what the design system is made of, how do you create one? What are the things you should assure? What are the things you should do and use in order to deliver and provide and create a design system for your brand? First thing you should consider is that you might start as a side project. There I spoke with many product teams, and they all sort of had the same approach. And that's because you might not have a budget in place, and you need to put your house in order anyway. So you start from, as a side project, and from there things will grow. Once you have something in place, you show to others, you will get traction, and then you'll get more buy-in. And once things grows, then you will need a working team. You will need UX researchers, UI designers, developers, product managers, customers, stakeholders, testers, and so on and so forth. Once things grow, think about the ways of working and other things that you need to consider. We'll cover that later. And also bear in mind that it's a ever-evolving product. It can start as a project. Project will have due dates to be delivered, but it will be a product. It will be ever-evolving. Once you launch the first drop, many changes, many interactions will follow. So some things you should consider while providing your design system. You have many materials. How do you organize that? So a good approach, at least the one that I like, you start from principles. So principles is mainly around the things you should consider while designing. So things you should keep in the back of your head while designing, the best practices, the do's and don'ts. And then you can look at the basics. The basics would be mainly for materials that your brand uses. So colors, typography, visual assets. And then components. Components are more the standalone, smaller elements that are interactive. Buttons, input fields, and that sort of thing. And then patterns. Patterns, it's a combination of smaller components. Perhaps your input search, for example, so your search form, it's combined of input fields, a button, perhaps an icon, and validation, so that's a pattern. And then you look at areas. If you have a UI or a website, you might have a left-hand side menu, a header, a footer, a call to action area, so those are areas. And then layouts, which it's how all the pieces are layout are combined and what's the structure you should follow in order to build applications or websites or newsletters, whatever. You also have to ensure a design pack. We're all designers. We need a design file in order to create things. So your design file, doesn't matter if you use Sketch, XD, Figma, you have to provide on that design file all the symbols that replicates all your interactive components. So that those will be static, of course, but it's there so your designs can just drag and drop and build UIs from there. Think about how the contribution will work. It's still early days on that sense. Like many tools, they don't really have a way of versioning control your design file, especially when you change one element, how that affects all the other designs that use that same element. So this is still something that most companies are figuring out. So yeah, this is something to consider. Naming conventions, also do peer reviews with your colleagues. I can show you later the Google Material UI Design Kit, which provides all those components, and designers can just drag and drop things to build more things. Also ensure a code base. Like I mentioned, you will need a developer to build things. Developer might be your best friend. It should be, at least. And in that case, he will need self-contained components and codes that they can use to create larger interface and etc. Think about that. Your design systems, you will be a standalone dependency. And when I say that, it's because if you have product teams that want to use all those components, all that material, they can just reference to that code base and start and go from there. Once they reference to that code base, it means they can start using those components and elements. They don't need to develop it or design from scratch. In that case, you need to think about naming convention, version control. Devs are really good on version control, so you hear things about like Git, yarn, npm packages, very advanced things. Like don't worry about, just say yes. They know what they mean. But yeah. And ensure usability as well. Like I mentioned, usability is really important. We need to start from the component level. So use a mobile-first approach while you design, and when you provide or you have your design system in place. Always test on mobiles. or different devices. And think about that those components, they might need to work on very different browsers and different environments and connections, speed, and so on and so forth. Perform W3C compliance checks. We all want to get a AAA, and always perform, just sanity check to make sure that all the interactions are consistent across components. Ensure testing. So you got to make sure that your design system it's tested all the time, because once you launch new things, you got to make sure that that will be working for those customers with minimal bugs, and also always version control your new features. So if something goes wrong or if something doesn't work quite well, then you can roll back to a previous version. This will provide confidence in your code for your product teams and end customers. Boom, it's implemented. Let's say we have a design system in place, you created your design system, you're very excited. Now what? What do you do? How do you go from there? And that's really the heartbeat. That's whatever we covered before, that's the fun stuff. Like you're creating, you're developing new things, and you're having a great time. Now it's a heartbeat for, at least for us, designers and creative, because then it's more about the marketing skills. You have to get buy-in. You have to find teams to adopt that. I'm pretty sure you have teams that will be lazy. We already have something in place. We don't want to convert to this. So you have to find ways or leaders that will that want to have the same alignment on the vision, on the UI as you or your team. Have to think about the feedback and communication as well. Like I mentioned, it's ever evolving. So if something's wrong or if you need something new, how can you get that feedback, work on that, and provide and communicate back to your customer or product team that something has been changed? The governance and collaboration, and once you have a design system in place, what's the ways of working? Are you going to have a dedicated internal team just looking after the design systems, or are you going to have contribution from many product teams? How is that going to work? There is not really a rule in there, so you have to find the best approach that works for your corporation. And then storytelling documentation. So storytelling, you need to create some case studies so that get buy-in, so that others that wants to use your design systems, they can understand all the benefits and what are the gains they can expect from that. And also the documentation, which is very important. Things change, you have to document all the changes, and it needs to be version control and documented quite well. Once you have everything in place, keep in mind that it must evolve. You have to listen to your users, perhaps your end customer, providing feedback that something doesn't work, or is your product team providing feedback that they need something differently. So really take that as a way of reimagining things. So revisit the content and structure. How can you achieve the same goal with smaller components? How can you regroup all the elements that are serving the same purposes? Rethinking the solution, and also rewrite the code and performance so that you can always evolve. Once you have something in place, design system in place, and people have started using that, those are the gains that you might expect. You might expect to see reduction in design work and production work. When I say work, more around the effort itself. So your internal teams will do more in less time. A good example, if you go to Westpac Group Design Systems, they reduce a design and production effort by 1,600%. That's a big number, and that's a really good case study. The other thing you might expect is that you provide a consistent user interface and user experience to your end customers, and that really will allow them to flow much nicely and interact much nicely with your brands and your products. And lastly, and that's something that you guys will gain. You have meaningful conversations about your product instead of talking about minimal little things such as styling or alignment that's not correct or different shades of blue that others are using. You go and really talk about the experience, the interaction, all the meaningful things that you want to be working for. So cool. Let's go to some examples and links that I would like to share with you guys. I guess the first one that we can cover, of course, we mentioned styleguides.io, which provides a lot of content for design systems, many examples, books, podcasts, talks, as well as tools, and etc. What we can also look at is InVision got a very good they call Design Systems Handbook and provides great content with many videos for companies that want to implement design systems, and some great case studies from companies that have adopted design systems. So have a look at that. The other thing you can look as well is Atomic Design. That's a book, and that really provides a great way of condensing and all the content that you want to provide on your design systems. Adobe has a great blog article about design systems. It's a huge URL, unfortunately, but perhaps you just Google building a design system, speed, scale, collaboration, innovation. They have some videos as well, so and they provide some stuff for XD as well. And as well as other articles out there. I mentioned about the design file. So this is my Google Material UI Kit. That's for XD, for example. So that's what I mean about the design file we want to provide. So in here you have all these symbols that your designers can just drag and drop and place in there, and off you go. So of course this is mainly around the visual elements. Your design systems should extend that and provide all the do's and don'ts, the interaction guidance as well as the code base. But in here it's a very easy way to start building UIs by reusing components. Cool. So back to the slides. I think that's it. If you want to keep in touch, my mail is ramoncliquet@gmail.com. If you want to talk about design systems, feel free to reach out, or anything design, I guess. I'd love to hear back from you guys, as well as feedback, and why not. My portfolio, ramon.im. Go there, check my work, and hopefully you'll get excited by that. And that's a wrap. Let's open for some questions. We still have 20 minutes or so. So yeah, I'd love to get some very difficult questions from you guys. I challenge you now. Thanks a lot.
Hi, Ramon.
Hello.
I work for the Department of Education and we use a design system. One of the things you didn't actually mention was theming on top of your designs. Yeah. One of the things we've discovered with designers quite often is that if we want to apply theming, they need to actually understand the HTML or the code below it so that they don't make themes that would break the structure. Yeah. Have you found that yourself? I mean, obviously you have if you're using theming at all. And how do you actually sort of approach that with theming? Because theming is really important if you're going to do this, so not everything looks exactly the same.
Yeah, for sure. I think depends where you're coming from. If your design system is actually leveraging code base such as Bootstrap or Google Material Design, then theming, it doesn't get easy, but it's not as complex. Where if you have a very custom design system that's just like coded from scratch, it makes really hard. It would be a pain in the butt. But if you start, in your case, do you know if they use Bootstrap? They leverage things?
No, we use UIKit. Bootstrap and UIKit, and most of them at the moment aren't particularly accessible, so we have had to do a lot of customization. But we have got a base of UIKit.
Yeah. So with the latest Bootstrap, let's say, Bootstrap provides you with a whole bunch of variables, which HTML, CSS code base, and those variables, they set all the styling for those components. Basically, if you would like to support theming, you would have to create a different file that overwrites all those variables with a different with a different color, shades, and whatnot. And then basically on your HTML itself, you would be switching, the CSS file basically once you move.
The way we tend to do it at the moment is we use the UIKit default CSS tags, the classes, and for our components we also add additional classes depending on the component itself.
Yeah.
And then we tend to have our styling based on the particular classes that we've put, which we place on top of the default UIKit styling. And we would do the same exactly the same structure for Bootstrap.
I agree with that approach, and I've done that approach before. My only concern is mainly, it means every time you have a new theme, you have to go and change support the theme for those multiple classes. If you use a variable, it means it's one file, and off you go.
Yeah, we tend to have a grayscale to start off with, so a grey theme that we base off, and then theming's just placed on top of that.
Yeah, that would be ideal. That would be the idea. If you go with Google Material UI, they do theming really well on the newer version. They just launched it like a month ago or something like that. And that has been the blocker for others trying to use theming on the Material UI. It was quite hard, and now it's much easier. You can have a look at that as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool.
So I'm currently building a custom design system. I'm interested as a full stack designer. Where do you feel that your work ends and the developers begin? Do you hand off screens? I mean, there's a lot to consider around interactivity and context. Are you handing over full HTML prototypes, or do you just finish with screens and then the developer's work begins? Or
it's hard to answer that question, especially for me. I have my hands dirty on code most of the time as well. I like doing that, so I really like that role of doing the front-end development side of things, or at least maintaining that. It depends on your background. If you feel familiar doing that, then I would say that it's better you do that. If you have the know-how, then do that, because it means we designers will have that eye for detail thing, which developers, some do, some don't. So it depends on your developer as well. But we designers, we tend to pick if there is a little issue, we see that, and if you do code, if you can, have your hands dirty on code, then you can very easily fix that. Whereas with developers, it might get a little bit hard, the relationship. If every time you need to fix something, you go to your developer and, how about this thing and how about that thing? You see what I mean? So it's hard to draw a line in the sand. I would say that it's good if you can maintain at least. You don't need to write, but if you can maintain CSS, then that's perfect, and HTML as well. Of course, if your design system it's connected to more complex code base, such as Angular or React, of course, in that case, we designers, we don't want to go that far. I don't want to go that far, at least, so I usually stay mainly around the HTML, CSS space.
My name's Allard. I'm a designer on the Atlassian design system, actually, so I was very happy to see that up there.
Well
done. You mentioned that you worked on 3 different ones, and the Atlassian one being very big. I agree with you with, what was it, the 4th section of the interesting part starts after you've built it.
Yeah.
One of the things that we struggle with is essentially governance and collaboration across that design system with essentially 20 products, what have you. Can you speak to the various governance and collaboration models that you've seen and what the good and bad things about them are?
Yep. So I think the biggest issue is when you have, if your design system, and most of your design work for your corporation, it's made by one certain team, then it gets easier for the collaboration side of things, because that team is the one that's producing most of the UI work, and they probably, they are the ones maintaining the design system. So that's easy. Once you have teams that are all over the place, all over the globe, perhaps, that gets really tricky. I think it would be ideal to have one team that is responsible for the maintenance of the design systems as well as the adoption, and get feedback from all those teams in order to evolve and provide something that anyone can use. Although most cases that's still not that's not the case for most companies. They want to spend some money for to support that. So I think if you have collaboration from perhaps leads on different product teams. So if you have a UX researcher here, a UI developer there, and circulate, and you guys can try to find a way of collaborating. Of course, you need to get buy-in from managers of those teams. So you can spend at least 1 or 2 days of your time. 2 days probably too much, but 1 day of your time with your hands dirty in that, and then you guys can start doing something. It might not be as quick as possible, like you might take, because you're not spending all your time doing that, but it's a way of because buying and adoption, you have to think about all the leaders and who is paying for that money. So it's hard to have the right way, but you have ways around. Perhaps collaboration cross-team is the one that it will make it easier, I guess. Does that answer your question? Beautiful.
We really, really appreciate you closing out the conference for us.
Cool.
I hope everyone's had a great time. We'll be around for the next few minutes if you want to come up and have a conversation with Ramon or myself. But thank you very much. We really appreciate it. We really appreciate you coming and doing that. Thank you.